You know how it feels to have your heart ripped out of your chest? Because after seeing the newest episodes of Arcane, I feel pretty confident saying that I do. I was not emotionally prepared for what I saw. These episodes feel both so fast and so slow, just taking their time getting you invested, even making you believe that a happy ending is possible, and then once they have you hooked, they just rip your heart out. That's Arcane, that's what it does. And instead of showing some self-preservation and sparing yourself the pain and suffering, you come crawling back for more. Okay, so let me just say that this video is pretty disorganized. I'm sure I will make separate video essays on different aspects of this season once it's fully out, but for now I'm just reacting on the spot and still processing the emotional roller coaster that it's been so far. And let me tell you, it was intense, just really freaking intense. There's so much to unpack this season and I don't even know where to start. So maybe let's go with the beginning, as episode 4 and the time skip right off the bat really sets the tone for the rest of Act 2. Probably my favorite thing about this episode is the Jinx, Isha and Sevika trio. The way all three of them found companionship and even a semblance of peace in each other is honestly surprisingly heartwarming. Sevika's intense and unwavering loyalty has always been admirable to watch, and seeing it directed at Jinx and Isha felt so right somehow. I'm actually a little sad that we don't see much of her for the rest of Act 2, but I understand how it would be hard to include her in the situation. And the Jinx and Isha's relationship was definitely a priority and needed time and space to be properly fleshed out. Either way, I really like how we could see a softer side of both Jinx and Sevika this season, how they became more than just a mentally broken girl and a woman who will burn everything in her way and then herself to keep his own spirit alive. I feel like it was a much needed change, especially for Jinx. Season 1 focuses so heavily on what made her Jinx, but until now we never got to see what kind of person she is beyond her trauma. And I would argue that it's really important because it humanizes her in a way. It allows us to see what could have been if things happened just a little bit differently. As fascinating as it was to watch her descent into madness, I'm glad we got a chance to see that under all these layers of trauma there's a person with her own motivations, passions and opinions. It's a nice change, and seeing this carefree Jinx, the one who's playing around with Isha, acting like an older sister and having a much stronger grasp on her emotions was honestly quite wholesome and made me feel for the character more than ever before. Because at the end of the day, we are more than our traumas, we are more than our pain. As much as these things change and shape us to the point where it's sometimes hard to look past it, it's important to remember that it's not all that there is to us. Jinx has always been presented as sympathetic, but there's a difference between sympathizing with someone just because you feel bad for them and sympathizing because they are unique individuals with their own struggles and motivations. It also proves that despite her pain and all the mistakes that she's made, she's still a very passionate person who feels deeply and is curious about the world around her. She's an inventor, she can make something out of nothing, and she doesn't give up on her loved ones. Her fast thinking, witty comebacks and ability to figure things out in a matter of seconds is what makes her a well-rounded character and what drives the audience to root for her despite all the atrocities she committed. I'm glad that Arcane's writers see that and allow her to grow beyond that traumatized girl who was ready to start shooting at the slightest provocation. I can only hope that with the events of episode 6 she will find the strength to keep moving rather than allowing her grief and trauma to consume her. And speaking of episode 6 and its ending, as much as some people say that Isha is nothing but a plot device character, I think her role in the story shouldn't be downplayed. I've seen some fans speculate that losing her will drive Jinx further into despair, but I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's time for her to face everything she's done and take this as an opportunity to grow. She still has a choice and she gets to decide what comes next. Jinx saved Isha's life, but it was actually Isha who gave Jinx a sense of stability and happiness she hasn't felt in years. And even though her being gone is bound to be a huge blow, I think Jinx will come out of this stronger. We can see at various points in these episodes how Isha grounded her and allowed her to access that inner child, that inner powder that she lost that night when she thought that Vi abandoned her. She also got to care about someone the same way she wished someone cared for her, and found a new goal in being this protective and almost idol-like figure in Isha's eyes. I think through Isha's eyes she got to see a version of herself that's no longer a Jinx. She even said it herself, that being around Isha is like wearing glasses, implying just how much she changed her perspective and made her see everything through a different lens. You see, a huge issue when it comes to her sort of splitting into those two versions of herself, Jinx and Powder, is correlated to the fact that after all she did in the first act of season 1, there was just no way to go back. She could no longer be Powder, and so she accepted being Jinx because it's all she had left. And she internalized it so strongly that I don't think it ever occurred to her that she can be something different. Powder and Jinx are both sides of her, but they are not contradictory, even though it may feel like they are. At the end of the day though, they are both her in equal parts, and one doesn't really negate the existence of the other. Isha, being a child and imprinting on Jinx so slowly, sort of forces her to reconcile those two parts of her. It also gives her the kind of perspective she didn't really have before, where she gets to see and experience how it feels to be responsible for someone so much smaller and weaker than you. Isha is capable of taking care of herself. She did survive this long after all, but the truth is that she shouldn't be like this. She's just a child, and she grew up with all this death and destruction around, never knowing if the next day won't be her last. I think that also explains why she bonds with Jinx so strongly and where her self-sacrificial tendencies come from. Honestly, when you consider that she dies at the end of this act, it really feels like the writers are dealing with some kind of taboo. Of course, children dying in fiction is not a new thing, especially in the world of Arcane, but going as far as to have a child sacrifice herself, that's pretty shocking and unexpected is what I mean. It feels like a small nod to the first season when Vi wanted to turn herself in before Vander came and stopped her. And it's not even the first time it happens. We've seen Isha jumping in between Jinx and danger to save her life on multiple occasions. She's also been actively trying to emulate Jinx's behavior, to the point where she even asked to have her hair dyed blue to capture Jinx's iconic look. Except all the previous times it feels like an in-the-moment decision, a reactive response rather than something she actually considered. Still worrying, but understandable given the high stakes and that children are impulsive by nature. This time though, at the end of episode 6, she moves with purpose and she absolutely knows what she's doing and why she's doing it. It's devastating to see this little regard for her own life from a child, and it truly drives the point about how bad life in Zone can be and how it's actively destroying the next generation. Stories about children dying in wars always resonate with people stronger than anything else, because we are wired to think about the future, to consider if we'll leave the world a better place for them. It's even emphasized by this little flashback scene where we see Powder and Vi's childhood with their parents, how all they and Vander were working for was a better future where they can grow up safe and happy. I think it might be very eye-opening for Jinx to gain this more adult perspective where she realizes she can't just come in and blast through things with no regard for anyone else. Because while she's been fighting for Zone and even became a symbol of resistance, she never stopped to think long-term about what it really means and whose lives will be the most affected by her choices. And this is honestly something that I think only a series like Arcane can pull off, to have a child sacrifice herself in such a manner for someone so much older, not even their own parent, but rather someone they loved in a deep, unrestricted way that only a child can love. Even if this is how Isha's story ends, I think calling her just a cheap plot device is a huge disservice to her character and her role in the story. We saw how much of a positive figure Jinx was in her life. She gave her a sense of safety and happiness that this little girl desperately needed. Maybe it didn't last long, maybe it was doomed from the start, but it still mattered. The unfortunate truth about life is that some people aren't meant to be in our lives forever. I think Jinx learning that and finding a way to honor Isha's memory would be a way more powerful message than the alternative, where she lets her grief consume her. If Isha is dead, and everything points to that being the case, then I'm curious to see what it means for Jinx in the future episodes. Like I said, it's pretty evident that Isha's existence had a healing effect on her, allowing her to see herself as something more than a mistake. She grounded her in reality in a way that Silco never did. Instead, he projected his own issues onto her, intentionally or not, only leading to the progression of her psychotic breakdowns. And having someone like that in your life, someone who helps ground you and make you see the world in a different way, can be a huge help. But in the long run, it can also be a crutch. While Isha was incredibly important to Jinx, she can't base her mental health and sanity on someone else. It's not how it works, and I think it's a crucial moment in Jinx's journey of self-discovery. Because I think that's what the writers are setting up, a moment where Jinx chooses for herself who she truly is and what defines her. Where she steps out of Silco's shadow and decides once and for all what she represents. It feels like what the story is building up to, and if I'm right, then I really can't wait to see that. Additionally, I think the fact that she and Vi got that closure for Vander, got to be a family again, even if just for a second, was a huge help too. They both kind of reached this point in the story where they tried everything and nothing worked out. They self-destructed and they grieved and they fought, but none of it helped or changed anything for the better. So finding each other in that moment and being there for Vander as they try to bring him back, it's kind of an uncharted territory. They can't exactly go back to trying to kill each other again, and it's not like it was working anyway.
If you come, use all that explosive potential of yours for good, maybe we could rewrite your story.
Based on this one Vi line in the teaser for the final act, it seems like she's encouraging Jinx to change her ways and find a way to define her own story going forward. And I think it's a good choice both for the sisters and for Vi's characterization in general. Like, she's tried so hard to pull Jinx one way or another, first refusing to see how she changed and then overcorrecting and accepting that she's changed too much. So I think it makes sense for her to step back now, to give Jinx space needed to make her own choices and to accept what comes next. And I really hope that this is what ends up happening and not just my delusional ass looking way too deep into a single line probably taken completely out of context. Just let me delulu my way until the next act drops. I clearly need that, for closure related reasons. Anyways, this is probably a good moment in this video to express just how much I love Vi. She's such an iconic character, and I think that scene of her letting go of her gauntlets when Jinx told her that the beast that's been hunting them is their father it's so powerful, and it perfectly illustrates who Vi is as a person and how much love and care she has in her. She looks so tough and strong, but I love how the writers managed to put so much softness and gentleness in her too, making her one of the most compelling characters I've seen in a while. Arcane is really good at showing duality and how no one is just one thing, how we all have these contradictions in us and they are perfectly normal. Vi might be one of the strongest people in the cast, but she also has a huge heart and her compassion is probably her biggest strength. In this moment when she reunites with Vander, she doesn't reject Jinx, she doesn't push her away or imply that she isn't needed. Instead, she welcomes her, she reaches out to her sister, allowing her this moment of peace with her family. And I think it speaks volumes about the kind of person Vi is, because she has all the reasons to reject Jinx, to push her away and decide that there's just too much bad blood between the two of them. But she doesn't, she recognizes that all of them need it, that this is the right thing to do. Her capacity for compassion and kindness, even towards those who hurt her, is admirable and makes me appreciate her character so much more. I wonder if getting this new experience with Isha will open Jinx's eyes to how much Vi loved her and how everything she did back then was to protect her. It was easy for Powder to see Vi leaving her behind at home when they went to save Vander as a sign that she considers her too weak to help. The thing is, we know that Vi never saw her sister as weak. She genuinely admired her gadgets and believed in her. She only ever held her back to protect her, and we know that she made the right choice, that Powder was too young to join them on what could potentially be a suicide mission. And she also felt responsible for her. She didn't want to be distracted by her fear of losing her sister and looking behind her shoulder every second in the middle of a fight. It's interesting to see Jinx being put in the same position, where she gets to see how it actually feels to be under this much pressure looking after someone who's still so young and innocent. It's a nice parallel and an interesting role reversal. It also directly parallels her own relationship with Silco, where despite being a guardian figure, he projected his own trauma onto her, inevitably making her mental state even more fractured and fragile. It feels like a real turning point for Jinx, facing what happened in the past and getting to decide what to do with her future now that there's no Silco, no Isha, and no certain path ahead. As much as people tried to turn her into a symbol, I don't think it's something that's good for her or what she would choose for herself. But given Isha's influence, who knows? There's really no way of knowing until we get there. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that the writers definitely delivered on things that were only set up or hinted at back in season 1, mainly Vander and Silco's story. Of course, we still don't have all of the details, we don't know exactly what happened and how it went, but we find out enough to learn more about their dynamic and the kind of friendship they had. We get to see that they were actually both close with Vi and Powder's parents, and that little flashback scene from episode 5 gives us some interesting insight into Silco accepting Powder and taking her in as easily as he did. I like how despite all of these things being new to us, the writers managed to write it into the story pretty seamlessly, to the point where you have no problem accepting it as canon. It's the kind of thing I really appreciate in storytelling, as way too often new information can be just just shoved in there by force to make it work. Arcane's creators use what we already know about these characters and use that pre-existing knowledge to add more information, which helps make it feel more organic and adds extra layers to the characterization. I can't say that it always works, but more often than not it does, and it enriches the storyline instead of taking away from it. Now, moving on to other major players on the season, I think I made a good choice refusing to make any predictions regarding Victor in my Act 1 video, because none of it is something I would have predicted. So yeah, it's probably a good thing I didn't make a fool out of myself trying to act all smart. I know the general consensus among the fans right now is that we hate Jace for what he did, but based on everything we've seen Victor do this season, I'm pretty sure his actions are justified. Or at least justified with the knowledge that the Jace had at his disposal when making the choice to kill Victor. It looks like based on the information available to him at the time, Jace saw something that convinced him that there is no other way and killing Victor is the right choice. Of course, we can't really know who's in the right, and it's entirely possible that both of them are right, or maybe neither of them is right. No matter which interpretation seems to be the most plausible at the moment, there's really no telling right now, and we have to wait until Act 3 is released so we can judge for ourselves. In the meantime, I'm officially a Jace apologist, because regardless of his motivations and what he saw, we know for a fact that Jace we spent 2 seasons watching would never as much as raise his hand in Victor's direction, much less intentionally kill him. There must be a very good reason, an explanation that will only make sense in context. Obviously, everyone's first instinct is to condemn Jace and his actions, especially because Victor is one of the biggest fan favorites, but looking at the teaser for the next act and what little we know about what happened to Jace, I think it might have been the necessary evil kind of situation. I think this scene of Victor temporarily possessing Salo in order to talk with Jace points to just how little we know about this commune created by Victor and the way it operates. There's a reason why it's being compared to a cult and why the creators aren't even trying to be subtle about it. This scene of Victor using Salo as a human walkie-talkie made me more uncomfortable than anything else this season, and I think it's clear that it was meant to make me feel that way. There's something so uncanny about Victor's voice coming out of Salo's mouth, especially paired with that hollow look on his face and how Victor can not only use him to communicate but also to see and feel things that he does. And then there's also the issue of all these people, all of Victor's followers, dying a horrible drown-out death as soon as Victor himself dies. Yes, they came to him on their own, they asked to be healed, but did they really know what they were getting into? Did they know this might happen? It certainly doesn't feel that way. And yes, some of them were already dying, true, but Victor healed all kinds of people, some of whom most likely had their whole lives ahead of them. He, knowingly or not, inevitably sped up this process. Not all of them were consumed by their addiction to Shimmer or permanently disabled like Salo. And then there's also the fact that all of them basically abandoned their previous lives to serve Victor and his community. Which, okay, makes sense, and there's certainly a parallel with the community that Echo created for Zonites to keep them safe from Piltover's political games and Silco's regime. However, these people made an informed choice, and as far as we know, they were free to leave if they wanted to. I sincerely doubt the same can be said about Victor's little cult-like community. They weren't forced, not exactly, and they did get what they wanted, but I don't think they had a way to know what it really means for them and their future. They seem peaceful, yes, but also devoid of personality and entirely dedicated to Victor and his cause. Of course, it can be explained by a gratitude towards him and desire to be kept safe in a calm and peaceful environment, but it's taken to such an extreme point that it definitely crosses the line into uncanny territory in my eyes. And that's not even getting into the weird visions and alien-like creatures that Jace saw, because for now we have no way of knowing what that's about. Their hive mind behavior is very unsettling, and even though Victor seems to frame his recent actions as some kind of greater good, I don't think it's necessarily true. The personality change we see in Salo is pretty striking, and the fact that all of Victor's followers' eyes are changed feels rather telling. This is also contrasted with Jace himself. We know he's also been changed when lost in the Arcane, but his eyes remained the same, and while there's certainly something wrong with him, he still seems to be mostly unchanged, at least as far as his personality is concerned. So whatever it is that Victor was doing, it was so much more than just healing. He was actively altering the minds of dozens of people, changing them on a fundamental level. Honestly, our only indication that he actually healed these people is the scenes of him trying to reach and heal Vander, but we have to remember that the process wasn't fully finished and that Vander's own human side was changed so much at this point that he definitely reacted reacted differently to Victor's efforts of healing him. There's really no telling how regular people were affected, and so many reasons to doubt that it was good for them in the long run. I genuinely think that many fans take what we saw at face value and believe that Victor's actions were 100% right, even though we can't know that for sure. Also, considering that Victor is set up to be reborn, I can't help but wonder what it means for his commune and if they will also be brought back to life by whatever connection they have with him. It would be a fascinating choice given how Victor's arc has always been about autonomy and making your own choices. Seeing him actively taking this choice from others and then going as far as to present it as some kind of greater good is actually deeply concerning and a huge contrast with Victor we were introduced to back in season 1. And given how closely his arc has always been connected to the theme of losing one's humanity and even his quote-unquote final words in episode 6, it really makes me wonder how much of old Victor was even left in him to begin with. Because I know for a fact that season 1 Victor would never justify preying on some of the most vulnerable people who come to him for help in this manner. Even if he has the best intentions and believes in his cause, whatever that is, it doesn't feel to me like what he was doing was right. So yeah, you won't be seeing me joining a Jace hate train anytime soon if I'm being honest. Obviously we still don't know how much he was changed by the Arcane anomaly and what it is that he went through. Whatever it is, whatever he saw, it's clear that it wasn't pretty and that it changed not only him but possibly the future of both Zone and Piltover for good. As interesting as it was to see Victor's perspective, I don't think it's fully accurate and it implies that whatever he's been doing to these people is actually far more sinister than it seems at first glance. Also, this season really said, I'm gonna strip these people of everything they are and everything they represent and change them in ways you never could have imagined. This is a huge theme this season and I have to say it's really been working for me. I certainly have some issues with this season that I will probably address at some point once Act 3 is released and we have the full story, but the themes themselves are strong and fit this story perfectly. Jace and Victor both going through something mind-altering and unimaginable is an intriguing parallel, especially since both of them come out of it so fundamentally different from both each other and from who they were at the start of the story. The way Arcane plays with all these tropes and themes typical for tragedies is heart-wrenching, but also so strangely cathartic to watch, and Victor's words at the end of episode 6 perfectly capture the essence of this show and its dedication to exploring what makes us human. I'm very curious to find out what Act 3 has in store for us, even though it's sad that we have to say goodbye to these characters. I really hope the final act will do them justice, especially those we haven't seen much in the last episodes, such as Echo and Heimerdinger. Considering what happened to Jace, I'm very interested in seeing what happened to the other two, given that they were right at his side when it happened. And while we didn't get much of Mel in the second act, I appreciate that what little we got presented her as the strong and resilient woman she is. Her side plot is fascinating and I love Kino's character even if it was never truly him. Their interactions were a lot of fun though and shed a little more light on what kind of mother Ambessa was. It's clear that even though Mel's relationship with her was strained, it doesn't mean that Kino was any more impressed with her parenting choices. Also, bonus point for Mel just smashing his head against the wall as soon as she realized he's not real. Not something I expected, but something that made me respect her even more, which is saying a lot. It was oddly satisfying to see someone as peaceful and collected as her do something so brutal and sudden, and to someone wearing her brother's face, no less. Yet another thing I can add to my ever-growing, hey, it wasn't on my Arcane Season 2 bingo card list. I said in my previous video, the one about Act 1, that I generally don't make predictions when it comes to Arcane. I choose to trust the writers and hope I will be satisfied with the results and that regardless of what happens, we'll get a well-written story with compelling characters, interesting twists, and a handful of existential questions that will haunt me for many nights to come. There's so much happening that, even though I'm usually a huge fan of theorizing, it just feels pointless somehow, because I know from experience that the story will go in a widely different direction than the one I expected. And honestly, in case of Arcane, it feels like a good thing. I'm happy that there's still media that can surprise me and make me feel things. Honestly, that's all I could ever ask for, and as sad as I am to know that Arcane is coming to an end, I don't think I've been this excited and hopeful about the show in a really long time. I can also respect the creator's choice to end it now, rather than drag it all out needlessly or lose control over their own story. I've seen it happen more than once in recent years, and I think in some cases it's just good to know when to stop. I prefer to be left with a feeling of wanting more rather than feeling like the story doesn't even know what it's trying to be anymore. And between the Black Rose storyline, Ambessa's army taking over, whatever's going on with Victor and Jace and the Arcane itself, there's certainly a lot of plot points that the writers still need to address and, at least to some extent, resolve. We know that this is the final season of Arcane as a series, but we also know that there are plans for this universe to be explored more in the future, most likely with other regions and other characters. That makes me very curious about the future of this world. Thank you for watching and listening to my very overwhelmed and confused rambling. I think it's fair to say that I'm still processing what happened so far and honestly kind of dreading what's yet to come. It's been a while since any show had me this emotional and not gonna lie, I'm actually really grateful for that. My life has been pretty overwhelming lately, so having a show like this to focus all this restless energy on is kind of a blessing really. I'm so excited to hear what you guys have to say about these new episodes. There's so much happening this season, it's honestly wild trying to keep track of all of it. I'm already working on multiple video essays about some of the themes and things that happened this season and just general quality of its storytelling. I know that there are some people dissatisfied with this season who feel like things are being rushed and also those who are just a little confused, which honestly I can relate to. There's a lot happening for sure and the emotional intensity of it all can be overwhelming, but I think it's one of Arcane's strengths actually. Nothing is as easy as it seems, nothing can be solved with just one thing. There's layers upon layers of misunderstandings and pain, and Arcane does an amazing job showing how needlessly complicated we can be. I like how brave it is, how it experiments with the formula and gives us something new and unique. I can only hope that Arcane's success will show producers and studio executives that animation is a form of storytelling that's worth investing into. It has so much to offer and there's a lot of people who want to watch it, who appreciate all the things it can do that other art forms simply can't. As someone who loves animation, it means so much to me to see such a high-value production being put out there and getting the recognition it deserves. It's a perfect medium to tell stories like this, to convey symbolism and themes in a way that will rip your heart out and make you sit glued to the screen for hours. I said it at the end of my previous Arcane video, but I am so glad to be able to experience this show as it's coming out and to hopefully see how it will affect the future of animation. It captures perfectly what's so unique about animation and how cartoons can be so much more than just children's shows. Again, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. As always, I can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments below, as it's very clear that this act left many people absolutely shattered, and that with the final act coming out next week, there's a lot of predictions and speculations about what's going to happen. I would love to hear if you have any theories or opinions about Arcane and to discuss them with you in the comments. So yeah, thank you and see you in the next one.